All right, preparing live stream. I think we're good. Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. My name is Kerry Miller, joined as always by my good friend Graham Dorn and regular guest. I don't know what that counts for, but third time back on, Mr. Made for March, Anthony Valentino. We have half of the mock committee together. We might as well just make the decisions now because we hold most of the cards at this point. But it is Wednesday. We're doing a little bit of Big East, but mostly mid majors because the Big East is not all that interesting right now, certainly this year. But um, let me pull up the spreadsheet and we will at least discuss the Big East. Very little to talk about. As I was saying before, TourneyCast has where the heck is there it is. I have so many freaking windows open I can't even find it. TourneyCast has Creighton at a 1.5% chance of making the tournament, but I'm pretty sure that is just saying they have a 1.5% chance of winning the Big East tournament because even if they win out, their wins above bubble will be a minus 1.58. So either something has gone horribly awry with Torvik or that's where we're at. But and Villanova is basically a lock, but we can talk Seton Hall for a minute before we get into the mid majors. Anthony, why don't you start us out with Seton Hall? How far out you have them, and assuming they don't win out, is there any case for them getting in?
Yeah, I have them seventh out. This was entering yesterday, and I know some of the things around the bubble changed a little bit. I'm not sure their positioning changed all that much, to be completely honest with you. Um, I mean, let's be real. The path is there for Seton Hall to make a push. I mean, they have to go to UConn. That's going to be, I mean, if they win that game, that's like you can see it on the WAB here. It's going to be a huge result. A true road win at a I would argue probably a two seed at that point if they beat UConn, but currently maybe a projected one. I think they got to win out the regular season to have a shot here. I think that's the realistic path. Maybe there's a scenario where they, ironically enough, sweep UConn and St. John's and don't beat Xavier, and the bubble kind of caves in on itself and they win a couple at the Big East tournament and they can still sneak in. I think winning out is probably requisite at this point to just to get to MSG with a legitimate shot. Now, the reality is they could win out and be, maybe a couple spots inside the cut line at that point, entering the Big East tournament, just with everything else going on at the bubble. It's a real shame with Seton Hall. I think the story was really good early on. What Shaheen Holloway did there. This team just can't score. That's a big problem. Bud Clark's awesome, but this team just is anemic on offense. I don't see them winning at UConn. I mean, if they do, the path is there. But I think they got to go 3-0.
I love your absolute chaos scenario there of they beat UConn and St. John's but lose to Xavier. That would be so perfect.
Yeah,
Graham, are
it would be
you in the
interesting.
same boat?
Well, I'm actually curious what happens if you put a little W next to St. John's right there.
Ooh, let me do that. That one right there. Okay. It does get them above bubble.
That's what I thought it was probably going to do, which is maybe if they make the Big East final in that scenario, I could see potentially not winning at UConn and still getting in, but it would be close. It would be like really one of those Saturday night selections where the committee's probably thinking like, all right, we got to finalize this. Are they in or are they out? We got to decide one way or the other. So what could come to their benefit if that was the case is all their metrics would be locked in without the Big East final loss. So the metrics actually might look a little bit better than the resume if the committee's into that sort of thing. And based on the past couple of years, they seem to be in that sort of into that sort of thing, looking at the metrics. So I don't know that at UConn is necessary, but honestly, if they don't win that one, it's hard to see how they're even going to make the Big East final in the end. Because as Anthony said, they're just not scoring the basketball. So it seems almost like it's going to be a moot conversation because they're going to decide pretty quickly they're not interested in making the tournament.
Yeah, I mean, for them to make the final, they're probably going to have to, like, if this is the scenario we go with, they lose to UConn, beat St. John's. If UConn beats St. John's tonight, and I think that would make UConn the one seed, Seton Hall the four seed, and in this scenario, like, they would have to beat UConn in the semis at that point to get in. So, yeah, at some point, they're
I,
going to have to beat the Huskies.
The challenge with the 2-win scenario, no matter what 2 wins it is there's too many variables in play after that. It is how many bid stealers are there?
Yeah.
What happens around you? It's truly out of their control. To Graham's point, I think there is a scenario where they could find themselves ahead of the cut line for sure. And the challenge for Seton Hall too is I think even if they go 3-0, their ceiling at this point might be Dayton, which I'm sure they would take over not being in the tournament. But just with their metric profile, it's really hard to imagine that team being above Dayton unless they truly won out from here until the Big East final, which I think at this point is a fairly unrealistic scenario. So interesting case. I wish this kind of had panned out better for the Hall. Like I said, I think it was a good story. That USC win got away, or that USC game got away from them in Maui. That game in Creighton got away from them a little bit late. Um, those two results flip, and this is we're talking a little bit of a different story here.
It would be fun if they went out, but I don't think Isaiah Whitehead is walking through that door. Villanova, we should at least discuss their seeding a little bit. Our combined average has them right in the middle of the 7 line at 26 overall. And that is me slightly bringing up the average by having them at 24. You guys both have them at 27. I hate them at 24. I'd love to have them more at like 30 because they only have one win particularly worth a darn outside of a sweep against this Seton Hall team who we've just, said needs to beat the 2 best teams in this league in order to even have a case for a bid. And even then it's questionable. So but I think as long as they don't lose out, they're in. That's why they're at 99.6% chance. If this is the route they take, losing at St. John's but winning those other 3, which they absolutely should, they would be at a 4.09 WOB, wherever that really puts them. It feels like a 6 or a 7 seed is probably where they're headed. If they do this and then they beat whichever team ends up with the 2 seed, St. John's or Villanova, before losing the Big East final. Let's say that scenario. What do you think Villanova ends up with? Graham, why don't you go?
I still don't see it better than a 6 seed in that scenario. I just really am not enamored with the profile at all. If they didn't beat Wisconsin, I really don't know what I'd be thinking about the profile right now. So for me, they're closer to an 8 seed than they are a 6 seed, even though I'm struggling to find anybody to put on the back of that 6 line. I just know Villanova's not it. Like, I don't care what the metrics say. I just know they're not it for me. I got to find somebody with something that I can justify because I don't see it with Villanova.
You're at the 6 line with Villanova, where I'm at the cut line with Indiana. Like, I don't know who goes here, but it ain't the Hoosiers. God help us. Anthony, what do you think Villanova's realistic ceiling is? And then we'll move on to the mid majors.
Yeah, I think it's probably the 6 line too. I struggle to get them higher than 7 now too, and I think the 8-9 is very much in play too if they stumble a little bit. To Graham's point, they have one win of note. Seton Hall being out is not helping them, and that I think that it's interesting that win also benefits from what Wisconsin has done lately. That win also didn't look very good a while back. I mean, we could have realistically been looking at, hey, they have a win on a neutral court against a 11 seed. Great. Now Wisconsin's much higher than that now, but it's a clean profile. Again, we've talked about this to death. The committee likes clean profiles too when there's not results to grab to, but I just look at what they did to Louisville last year in a not exactly the same resume, but a similar-ish resume, devoid of significant, results. And Villanova doesn't even have the metric profile to match that of last year. And again, there's the gap on the 6 line. Who do we move up? NC State getting hammered a couple times now. They should drop, but it's like who's there? And Villanova is not really compelling enough yet to get there. 3 out of 4 down the stretch, maybe it looks a little bit better, but I don't know. I think they're prime back end 6 through top of the 8 line, somewhere in that range as where they end up.
It's about where I'm at too. I can't imagine getting them any higher than where I have them, even if they finish pretty strong. Let's move on to the mid majors. I did not bother putting Gonzaga's resume on here. We have them, all 3 of us have Gonzaga at 12 overall right now, which is also where the committee had them 5 days ago. They're obviously a lock. St. Louis and Utah State both according to Tourneycast, are 100% lock. I don't agree with that at
Is
all.
St. Louis a lock? I wanted to ask you guys about that. I was
That's
very
what it
curious about
says.
that.
Yeah,
What
I don't
Graham's
think so.
Graham's a lock guy, so I wanted to ask Graham here. What are they a lock?
I don't even have them in win next game and lock. So that tells you how far away from a lock I think they are.
Okay.
I do think they'll make the tournament. I think Utah State will make the tournament. I think a lot could still go wrong for both teams. And if it does, the committee has not been kind to mid-majors who have a lot go wrong. So I think both have some work to do. I do think St. Louis had kind of a mulligan against Dayton. After they beat VCU, I felt really good that they could lose one and not be in any danger whatsoever. Still feel that way. I just think the next one will be the one that gets them towards the bubble if they lose another one.
I think for St. Louis, it's get through the next two, and I feel good about where you're at. And that seems silly because again, I feel like a good amount between them and the cut line right now. But there's not a ton of meat on this resume. They don't have a lot of opportunity ahead of them. Other people do. And to Graham's point before, the committee, I hate this, but they have seemed to itch to get mid majors lower, over the past 3 to 4 to 5 years, even going further back than that. So anything you can latch on to on a resume that maybe is a little bit more thin, I feel like they're going to. So we'll see. I think SLU gets to the next two. They avoid a bad loss, and at GMU is not terrible. And then you get to the A10 tournament, they're probably okay.
It's wild that at GMU has turned into a .31 wins above bubble opportunity. Like that's a tough game. I mean, that's not a game that I would expect a bubble team to win 69% of the time. But yeah, to your point about, the NCAA wants to punish mid majors for no apparent reason. I mean, I've noticed that with going through all this WOB stuff that most of the mid majors are about like 0.7 lower in the NCAA's WOB than in Torvik WOB, because I think the NCAA WOB is based on the 40th best team and Torvik is based on 45th best. So all those quad 3 and high quad 4 wins, like they're just losing like 0.03 in each one. And that adds up after about
So why
25
is
of
that though?
those.
That makes no sense because the first four would cover through about seed 44, right?
Yeah, I don't
Ish.
know. I don't know. I haven't seen the actual
And that's a bubble team. So why would that
NCAA
make
data.
any if
So
that's the cut line, shouldn't it be measured around where the first four ends?
I think what their philosophy was on this, and it's funny because I was actually bringing up this point to other bracketologists exactly today, the same thing about the difference between Torvik WOB and NCAA WOB. But what I seem to recall the logic was at the time they came out with it is that about the 40th best team would be the bubble team, and I had the same thoughts. But then you look at the quadrant 1A, and that's top 40 on the road. So that seemed to line up from what they had done their studies of like what are the hardest, like it tends to be a road game against an NCAA tournament team. That's the top 40 because they don't split that with that 75. They don't split it exactly in half. They go up to 40. And I think they had the same logic here. We could just go down to 40 a little bit. So I don't know if I agree with the logic, but I can see why the NCAA might want a nice clean number. It's ironically, I'm pretty sure the women's basketball committee just instituted WOB and they use 45th best in net as opposed to 40th.
I mean, I know Torvik is 45th because I've looked back, like whoever was, I guess right now, New Mexico's 44, San Diego State's 46. So you can like go back and see what wins were against those teams on a neutral court, and it's exactly 0.50. So yeah, I think that's the difference. And that's why these mids are, St. Mary's on Torvik is like a 3.3. Miami, Ohio, I think is a 3.0. Santa Clara's maybe a 2 in Torvik. San Diego State is like a minus -0.2. New Mexico is close to a 1. So yeah, they're all like across the board just a little bit worse. And funny thing is we still have like 54 teams with wins above bubble that are positive. Like it still is not high enough with how it's factoring in. But Utah State, I think they're effectively a lock. Even if they lose all four, I mean that drops them to a 0.37. That would be bad. But if they go 1-3, I think they're probably in. What do you guys think?
I'd like
Oh
to see
boy.
it in the Mountain West tournament in that scenario. I don't think it's a lot going into the Mountain West tournament.
I kind of feel like you're saying if they go 1-3 in the rest of the regular season, Kerry, you think they'll
Yeah,
still get
so
in?
let's say they lose. Let's say they lose at San Diego State. I think that game's tonight. Uh, excuse me. Yeah, they lose that. They lose at UNLV and they use to New Mexico. So that would put them at a 1.37. Um, I don't know. I don't know if that gets them there. I think it probably does though.
I feel a lot
It
better for
would.
them if they can go 2-2 down the stretch. And I still think it becomes iffy. Again, I just there and again we have to go off of what the committee has broadcasted to us in recent years. Obviously, we had the Mountain West disaster, if you want to, like the Hindenburg for the Mountain West a couple years ago, basically, where they were treated. I don't whether some people think fairly, some people think unfairly. I would lean more towards the unfair part with the seating and inclusion. But I just don't trust that that's especially that was a year where the Mountain West was very good too. And now we're talking about a year where the Mountain West is not so good, unfortunately, in their last year as existing in the current iteration. And I don't know. I feel like Utah State, obviously, for the league, they might want to give that game away to New Mexico. That would certainly benefit the league as a whole. But I think they still got to win a couple games down the stretch. None of those are particularly bad losses per se. I mean, that GCU game in UNLV could be looked at as not great, but I don't know. I'm not convinced that if they go 1-3, that they're not going to have to do some serious work in Vegas.
Yeah, 2-2 numerically should be fine, but the 1-3, to Anthony's point, I'm particularly bothered by the Mountain West not getting quality wins out of conference this year, because they have done that year after year after year recently and still weren't treated well by the committee. This year, you can't really find anything that sticks out. It's like, okay, New Mexico win at VCU, nice win, but that's what we're going to bat with this year. Like, we don't have what San Diego State had last year when they're like, hey, we beat Houston on a neutral court, let us into the tournament. Nothing like that this year.
And the good thing for Utah State is, I mean, if push comes to shove and they really do slide back, they do have a win against VCU and a win at the pit in their back pocket, which is very useful. But obviously, I think 2 to 3 wins is really what they need to target out of here. And I mean, they should be able to get that. But at SDSU is not going to be easy.
To your point, Graham, the lack of quality wins at a not only Mountain West wide, I mean mid-major wide level. If you go to Torvik team sheet ranks, then filter to mid majors, and then sort by quad one. Like Gonzaga has 6 wins, nobody else has more than 3. Nobody has multiple quad 1A wins. Like UNLV has one of the best wins of all, that being at Utah State. And then Portland's win over Gonzaga is probably the next best outside of Gonzaga's win over Alabama. So there's just not much excitement for any of these mid-major teams. Even with St. Mary's and Santa Clara, they've got great records, no great wins between
Well,
them.
and that
And
goes right to Graham's point. It's like their case this year is based on volume and quantity and clean record, not
mhm.
hey, we have a few key wins. So that's why, USU going 1-3 down the stretch is really tricky. And there's really no, to your point, Kerry, no better example of, and I know we'll get there in a minute, but striking out against quality competition, even though we know they're probably a good team, than VCU.
Mm.
No better example
Yeah,
of that trend than them. So I know we'll get there in a minute, but
yeah. I mean, we've been talking about VCU all season long on Wednesdays. I mean, since we started in early January, it's like, wow, VCU shows up a lot as the best win for a lot of teams, but I mean, how good is that win? Does that help VCU get in? I mean, we can jump to the Rams right now. I think they are the interesting team in this bunch because after all the carnage from last night, all of a sudden VCU has a pretty solid case for a bid. I mean, I do want to mention with these seed averages that we have, part of that was Anthony, you sent your list and you were like, well, I haven't done a proper scrub yet. And I think that's helpful for when people look at the bracket matrix and like
yeah.
half of the data is from a day or 2 or 3 days ago and you're like, well, how is this team still here? So it hasn't updated yet. So I think it's fun to see that every now and then because Graham and I both have St. Louis as a 9, but you had them at 28 overall, which is also where I had them uh, 24 hours ago. But now
Yeah.
they slip a little bit. But VCU, they are now my last team in. Graham, I think they were your last or second to last in. And Anthony, I don't know if you did a scrub and where you ended up on VCU, if they slotted in barely, but
No, I
they're
haven't
right
updated
there
today.
either way, with a complete lack of marquee wins. The VCU fans definitely want you to know that now that Virginia Tech win, is Virginia Tech still 50 or did that drop back down to quad 2? Okay, they are still at 50. So VCU has a quad 1 neutral win over Virginia Tech, which actually could be massive because Virginia Tech is the team I have as my first team out. Uh, Graham, you got VCU in. How much did the Virginia Tech win factor into that? Just because of the head-to-head, more so than the fact that it actually is quad 1 now.
Massive. I was going to have Virginia Tech 45th overall, but because of that loss, I actually have Virginia Tech as my first team out simply because of the head to head. And then I was going to have New Mexico out. I actually had, this is the crazy thing about last night. I had New Mexico out of the field. They went to Nevada and lost, and I moved them to 45th overall because all of a sudden I looked at some of these resumes from the Big Ten. I'm just like, I can't do it. It's just not good enough. It's too many
You don't
opportunities.
want Indiana in the field, Graham? Come
Yes,
on.
and that's really what happened for New Mexico. Is I looked at it and I was like, Indiana took a worse loss than I. It's hard to go win in Reno. It's not that difficult. Not saying it's easy, but it's not that difficult to beat Northwestern at home. So I actually moved New Mexico in because of the head-to-head win at VCU, and it is crazy the way this is lined up this year. VCU loses to New Mexico at home, but they win over Virginia Tech on a neutral court. Virginia Tech beat Cal at home, which I also think is important because I have Cal 2 out of the field and Virginia
Yep.
Tech right in front of them. And then you look at New Mexico and they shellacked Santa Clara at home. So now New Mexico's connected to 2 bubble teams, beating Santa Clara handily at home and then winning at VCU. I just felt like it all lined up. I did actually keep Santa Clara right above New Mexico simply because I do think there's enough of a difference there that I feel confident Santa Clara would be in today. But wow, all of these teams are just so interconnected, and we're going to have to see a big result for one to jump in front of the other because I imagine the head to head talk is going to be pretty significant in the committee room.
So if VCU wins out, they would get to an estimated WOB of 1.18, and that's, I mean, where's the Big Ten one from yesterday? Like that's where we landed on so many of these Big Ten teams. And granted, that was assuming Northwestern win by Indiana, so that has changed. But I don't know if 1.18 is enough. It gets them very much into the conversation. I think if they were to win these 3 and then at least show up for the A10 tournament, they've got a chance. And that runs on Sunday afternoon, right? The championship of the A10.
Yep.
So they'll already have to have made their decision by then, even though they'll say, you know, we've got the contingency brackets. Let's go to the St. Mary's and
Real
Santa
quick
Clara.
on
Yeah,
VCU
go ahead.
though. I was just going to say, I think what's interesting with them is not only the Virginia Tech game, which obviously matters a lot with VT right next to them. And frankly, if I'm VCU, I'm rooting for Virginia Tech. I hope Virginia Tech gets an 8 seed and runs the table
Yeah.
because that obviously just looks that much better, even if they pass you on the seed list. But I also think that South Florida game matters too. It's interesting. It's not going to be an at-large team, but this South Florida team looks night and day different than they did earlier in the year. And this is a good basketball team. They have a pretty manageable schedule down the stretch. If South Florida can go 4-0 entering the AAC tournament, that's going to be a top 50 game as well. I think their hardest game left is at Memphis, and they just crushed Memphis. Granted, it was in Tampa, but that's an important game too. And VCU has an interesting problem because they have the same problem that a lot of those Big Ten teams had that we just talked about, which is did not convert against quality competition. But I also think and we have this debate every year, but I really do think someone in the committee room's got to sit there and say, You know what? They did go out of their way to schedule tough this year, and because they don't get the opportunities. Yes, they did strike out a lot, but a lot of those games were close. I mean, that NC State game was tight. That Utah State game was tight. They played a lot of those games tight for the most part. I know the couple that were farther away, but most of them were close. And I think that matters for something. Whether that's enough to convince everybody else that it matters for something is really the variable here. Um, I really think the Rams probably have to win out as well, similar to Seton Hall, just to keep pace, just with what they have left on the schedule. But that Dayton game may end up quad one. That's not going to be an easy
Hmm.
game for them, as St. Louis found out as well. But we'll see. I think the Rams. I think they got to go 3-0 and probably have to make a deep run A10. But they're there, and I think it does sort of matter what happens to VT in South Florida too. That I think they're very, as you said, very interconnected.
I agree with you
Yeah.
on everything. I genuinely wanted to bring up the same exact point. So I'm glad that you said all of those things because it's exactly why I put VCU as my last team in for all of those reasons. And something that I do think was really important is as I was looking at some of the teams that I left out, for example, Ohio State, I got down to really, it was actually the losses that I spent so much time looking at because you got Ohio State, they've got all those opportunities. They also lost to Pitt. VCU had less opportunities against quality competition, but they did play a lot of quality competition out of conference. And they don't have that really bad loss that I look at and I'm like, hey, like when a team plays out of the A10, I expect them to take a really bad loss somewhere along the way
Yeah.
because they play so many of those
Yeah.
games. Ohio State doesn't play that many of those games, and they still lost to a Pitt team whose only other power conference losses are against Wake Forest and Georgia Tech and Notre Dame. So, or excuse me, wins. So I looked at that and really thought that was a difference maker for me on why VCU actually it's their losses that I have so much respect for.
Yeah. I mean, their only loss to a team outside of at least your projected field, Graham, is at George Mason, which like it looks bad, but again, we're talking about St. Louis. Like that's not a game you expect a bubble team to win 69% of the time. That and certainly back when it happened. I mean, Mason was a much better team back then. So we'll see. I think VCU is right there though. Let's hit on St. Mary's and Santa Clara because that game is that tonight or tomorrow night? I think it's tonight.
I think
Do I
it's
have to stay
tonight.
up late? I'm gonna have
I
to
believe
get
it
a
might be
cup of
11.
coffee. I'm sure it is. Yep, 11 o'clock. There's that game at 11. There's also Utah State at San Diego State at 11. All right, I'm gonna make some coffee. But if it plays out this way that we have here, St. Mary's wins the home game against Santa Clara, then loses to Gonzaga. That's I've been saying for a while that's kind of the disaster scenario for the West Coast Conference, but I do think St. Mary's would be in with how much the bubble has slipped since we started theorizing about that possibility. And I mean, even Santa Clara might still be in, even if they lose this game. What we have them at 43.3, so that's like the top team in Dayton, basically. St. Mary's is on the 9-10 seed cut line there at 36. Anthony, what do you think? What do these teams need to do?
Ooh. I'll start with St. Mary. I think in that scenario, I think the Gales get in. I think the reality is too for St. Mary's is they would still have, again, I hate to continue to say clean profile, but in general, a pretty clean profile still. Their biggest weakness being they also struck out against top competition, right? They would have had or been swept by Gonzaga at that point, lost at Santa Clara, the Vanderbilt game, right? But again, overall, basically did whatever else they needed to do for the most part. And I do think I mentioned this to something you tweeted about a while ago, and maybe this is me being naive and thinking this, but I really do think if push comes to shove on the bubble, St. Mary's will get a little bit of respect for being St. Mary's and the fact they've been so consistent in the NCAA tournament. Your counterpoint to that was, which is fair, well, they also haven't done much once they've gotten there, so maybe they don't get the respect. And I think that's actually a very good point. Um, but they've been a staple for the most part over the last 10 years. And I think looking at a clean profile where their biggest gap would be just having the really key win. I mean, there's a lot of teams that have one key win and have a lot of striking out against top competition too on the bubble. They just didn't have as many shots. And so I think they get the benefit of the doubt, but it'll be close. And it's the funny thing is it's hard to imagine a scenario for the WCC right now where three bids come into play, especially how we have it tabled here. It does feel like it may come down to one of those teams, St. Mary's or Santa Clara, having to get to the beating the other to get to the WCC final if they're going to end up splitting like this. Unless real true chaos, Santa Clara wants to win tonight at St. Mary's, and St. Mary's wants to beat Gonzaga, then maybe we have the true chaos scenario, which would be nice. But I find it hard. I'm really having trouble with seeing a path to three staying in the field, even though I do have it that way now.
I've seen a lot of people saying that like either way, as long as Santa Clara wins one of those games, either whether it's this one on the road or in the WCC semis, like that they treat it like it's the same thing, but it's clearly not. Not only is a road win over St. Mary's more valuable than a neutral win, but you're also going to have one fewer loss on your resume if we're assuming that they would win the semi and then lose to Gonzaga in the championship. Otherwise, why are we talking about them as an at-large team? So I think I would much rather see Santa Clara win this one, finish off the regular season sweep, and get that. I mean, that would be a quad 1A win, and then lose in the semifinals to St. Mary's. I think that could be the three bid scenario in which Gonzaga doesn't lose at all to either of these teams. But Graham, what are you thinking on the Gales and Broncos?
Yeah, St. Mary's is an interesting one because I hate where I have them seated because everything about their profile to me says bubble team. But then you look at all those metrics and it's just like, ugh, is the committee really going to do that when all of the metrics are so consistent? And I think about that Nevada team. Anthony, you were talking about the Mountain West when they had their, I forget what you call it, the Mount Apocalypse or whatever it was.
The
But
Mount
that year,
Apocalypse.
I like that.
they were like a 7 seed. Most people, myself included, had them as a 7 seed, and then they ended up as a 10 seed. And so it is possible to miss bad on a Mountain West team. I think it's also possible to miss bad on St. Mary's this year because if you kind of look at the whole profile, maybe it's not so strong. But the counterpoint to that is at least with those teams in the Mountain West, we knew strength of record was a problem for them. We knew BPI was a problem for them. We knew those things were problematic. We just thought the committee would look at the total resume and be like, okay, we understand BPI is tied to strength of record. That's making it look worse than it really is. But the committee totally went back and was like, no, you have bad strength of record. You get to the back of the seed list. I think with St. Mary's, what could really ultimately end up helping them is how much the NCAA is focused on WAB this year. They're just talking about it all the time. And if they end up putting a 2-point something WAB together, I just don't see the committee saying no, even if the resume isn't really that strong. So that would be the thing I'm looking for is the WAB close enough to leave out? Because if not, I just don't see the committee having the taste for it this year based on how much they've tried to advertise how important it is.
I do find it interesting that you have, I gotta confirm this. I guess you have moved Miami, Ohio up a little bit, but you have St. Mary's at 32 overall and Miami, Ohio at 40 overall. And I know it's because of the like you're moving up a little bit on Miami because of the WAB and the SOR, but I don't know how you get two seed lines between those teams. I think I have them like back to back on my seed list at this point. Uh, let's quickly hit on the two Mountain West teams who, Graham, you somehow scrubbed New Mexico in after a loss. I scrubbed them out. And San Diego State, I think, is already out and nearing death. They need to overperform down the stretch in order to get in. As you see here, they're already at a negative WAB. They are projected to finish with a negative 1.69 WAB because they're supposed to lose all of those games except the UNLV game. But if they were to beat Utah State tonight, what do you think? Any chance? If they beat Utah State, is it then whoever wins the subsequent game in the the pit would be the team that gets in?
I tend to think that San Diego State, if they win 3 of 4, I think they're alive entering the Mountain West tournament. I think if they win 4 of 4, they're in, barring a bad loss in the Mountain West tournament. So I kind of find like both teams have a really good path. What's a good path for San Diego State is that they are clearly out for me right now and not close. So I think their good path is having so many big games yet to come. That allows them
Yeah.
to make those big moves into the tournament. So I'm glad if I'm San Diego State that I've got such tough games remaining. As for New Mexico, that path you have right there, beat San Diego State, beat Colorado State, lose to Utah State, probably not enough. So I'm happy to have that at Utah State game at the end as well, because if I get that one, that changes everything. And if I'm going to lose one, I'd actually probably prefer to lose to Colorado State and beat San Diego State and Utah State because it will look better for the committee.
That's the Seton Hall losing to Xavier scenario, basically, but that does make sense. Yeah, I feel like if Utah State takes care of business down the stretch, like if the Aggies win out, it's probably a one bid Mountain West. I think these teams, both of them, are going to need that marquee win at this point, more so San Diego State than New Mexico. But Anthony, what do you think?
No, Graham hit on kind of everything I was going to say. I do think though the Mountain West is primed for a bid steal this year. Primed for it. I mean, Utah State to me has looked very, very good, but they throw them on a neutral court. I'm not convinced that they're going to win in Las Vegas either. And so I do think there's still a realistic chance we get 2 out of that league, even if the at-large pool says no heading into that tournament. I really Graham made a really good point on San Diego State. I mean, if they rattle off the next 3, which is hard to imagine given how they've looked lately, they're alive and well. I mean, those are 3 solid wins. Again, how we look at them and how the committee looks at them is really the key. I mean, from a WAB standpoint, you can't argue with the numbers for each of those games. Those are pretty valuable figures. But I think the Aztecs have the best path. They just happen to be much further behind. And the one thing I wanted to say, just overarching thing, looking at all these teams, this is where it will get really interesting, and we're not quite there yet. But in a couple of weeks, when this maybe narrows itself down a little bit, or maybe some of those teams that are a little bit ahead, like St. Mary's or Utah State, pull back a little bit, it is going to be fascinating to look at because we know, I mean, I think we can assume at least that there is no way if there are, let's say, we're talking about the last 8 teams, last 4 in, first 4 out, and there's 4 mid-majors in that pool. There's no way more than two of them are going to Dayton. No way. I'm gonna put it maybe not 0, but 2% chance that happens. I just think the committee will not do that. Unfortunately, even if they are the 4 most deserving teams of the bunch, it's highly unlikely to see that. And so that's really where, again, the fact that some of these teams have played each other is really interesting. That they have head-to-heads against some of these other bubble teams comes into play. We mentioned Virginia Tech. I think didn't St. Mary's also beat Virginia Tech on a neutral court, which is interesting. So I don't know. I know when looking at this, I'm like, there's no way maybe more than a couple of these teams on top of St. Louis and Utah State probably get in as at larges, but this pool will probably shrink. It's just going to be very fascinating to see when we get to the end how many of these teams are really left right at the cut line, because we're going to have to make some tough calls on who, just knowing that probably they're not all going to get the benefit of the doubt.
I'm glad you brought up that St. Mary's result because I've had like a bunch of VCU fans telling me like it's basically the same resume. Like we beat Virginia Tech on a neutral, we won at Davidson. Like what's the difference? I'm like, well, you have 2 more losses, and if St. Mary's loses their next 2 games, they're very much on the bubble too. So what do you want? Like
And
it's
the
a numbers game.
metric profile is better for St. Mary's too.
Right. Yeah. Just because of the additional losses, really, more than anything. Like they weren't bad losses, but Graham, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Couldn't agree more with what Anthony said about they're not all going to be there. I think we are primed for an SEC team to be somewhere in that Dayton call. And I also think that the Big Ten's probably going to get one of those teams that we're struggling with. I think they're going to send one.
There's too many hanging around there to not have a Big Ten
too many
team
hanging
there.
around there. I think we're probably looking at one SEC, one Big Ten, probably one mid-major, and then I think the X factor is, do you see a Big 12 team like TCU pop in there, or maybe one of those ACC teams? I could see Virginia Tech or Cal, one of those two potentially ending up there as well.
And let's not forget another thing the committee has to deal with a little bit. And again, these are different seasons. It does suck that these comparisons are there, but I think this might be in the back of their mind. They sent San Diego State to the first four last year, and they got absolutely destroyed by a North Carolina team that most people thought shouldn't even be in the tournament. So again, there is this perception of, how many mid majors can you really stick in that last spot, especially since it's right on the cut line. You can't even say, well, they were clear of that, so it's not our fault. I don't know. We'll see.
I'm not saying anybody's doing anything that they shouldn't be doing as far as making, decisions with integrity, but I'd imagine some of those SEC athletic directors, those university presidents, those Big Ten presidents, they would love to see not just a tournament credit for going to Dayton, but also for winning one and heading into the actual bracket. That's, instead of just getting one tournament credit for appearing in the first round, you get two because you get that extra one for going to Dayton. So just something to think about.
To your point, Graham, on Virginia Tech and Cal, always remember, if there's an ACC team that you're thinking about just leaving out, they're going to be in. It happens every freaking year. So that'll wrap us up for today. Thank you, Anthony, for joining us. We're going to talk your ear off next weekend when we get really into the mock. We got to start sorting out the timing on that, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Until next time, take care, drink your coffee because it's going to be a late night, and enjoy the hoops.